Is life in Singapore becoming too expensive for the average citizen? With rising food prices, skyrocketing housing costs, and now the GST hike, many Singaporeans are feeling the squeeze like never before. Everything is getting more expensive, and people are asking, why did the PAP raise GST now, and how much worse will the cost of living get? In this video, we'll break down the real impact of the GST hike on your wallet. Who suffers the most? Middle-class families, low-income groups, or businesses? And what's next for Singapore's economy? Will prices continue to rise, or is there hope for relief? If you want to stay informed about how the 9% GST affects everyday life, Singapore's inflation crisis, and whether wages will keep up, keep watching. Let's dive in. What is the GST hike, and why did PAP implement it? Singapore's Goods and Services Tax, GST, saw a staggered increase from 7% to 8% in 2023, and then to 9% in 2024. This marks one of the most significant tax adjustments in recent years, affecting nearly every aspect of daily life, from groceries to healthcare and transport. The People's Action Party government has justified this hike as a necessary move to sustain rising healthcare costs and social welfare programs, particularly given Singapore's rapidly aging population. Why did PAP raise GST? According to the government, the GST hike was long planned and unavoidable. Singapore has one of the world's most rapidly aging populations, with projections indicating that by 2030, 1 in 4 Singaporeans will be 65 years or older. With this demographic shift comes a higher demand for healthcare services, elder care, and social support. To fund these growing expenses, PAP argued that increasing the GST was a responsible step to maintain fiscal sustainability. However, critics have pointed out that Singapore already has strong financial reserves and other revenue sources, questioning whether a GST hike was the only way to finance social spending. The opposition Workers' Party, WP, for example, has argued that alternative measures, such as using more of Singapore's net investment returns contribution, NIRC, could have provided funding without burdening everyday Singaporeans. How does the GST hike affect basic necessities? While certain essential items like fresh food and medical services are zero-rated or exempt from GST, the increase still affects a broad range of everyday expenses, including groceries. Processed food items, beverages, and dining out have become more expensive. Utilities and public transport. Households now pay more for electricity, water, and MRT bus fares, which have already seen price hikes. Healthcare. Private medical services and medication costs have risen, impacting those without government subsidies. Housing and rental costs. Higher construction and material costs have made homes more expensive, indirectly affecting rental and home prices. For businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, SMEs, the GST hike means higher operating costs. Many have passed these costs onto consumers, leading to a compounded rise in prices across multiple sectors. This has worsened inflationary pressures, making the cost of living crisis even more apparent for middle-class and lower-income families. Why was the GST raised during a period of inflation? Timing has been a key concern. The GST increase came at a time when global inflation was already pushing up prices, fueled by supply chain disruptions, geopolitical instability, and post-pandemic economic shifts. With Singapore's core inflation rate remaining elevated, many Singaporeans feel that this tax hike added unnecessary strain on household finances. Even though the government introduced measures like GST vouchers, cash payouts, and U-Save rebates to cushion the impact, many feel these relief efforts are temporary solutions to a long-term problem. For the average Singaporean, their wages have not increased at the same rate as living expenses, making it harder to manage daily costs. As Singapore navigates economic uncertainty in 2025 and beyond, the question remains, was the GST hike a necessary financial decision for the country's long-term stability, or did it worsen the growing affordability crisis for everyday Singaporeans? How the GST hike hits your wallet. The 1% increase in GST may seem small on paper, but for the average Singaporean, it adds up quickly across daily expenses. Whether you're buying groceries, taking public transport, or paying medical bills, the impact of this tax hike is felt every single day. How much more are you paying? 1. Groceries and dining out. A trip to the supermarket now costs more than before. While fresh produce remains GST exempt, Many everyday essentials, including processed foods, packaged goods, and household items, are affected. Prices at hawker centers, food courts, and restaurants have also gone up as businesses adjust to higher operating costs. Even fast food chains have revised their menu prices to account for the GST increase. 2. Transport costs. Taking an MRT or bus, fares have already risen, and with GST increasing, expect even higher transport costs in the future. Taxi and ride-hailing services like Grab and Gojek have also adjusted their pricing, making daily commutes more expensive. 3. Medical costs. While government healthcare services remain subsidized, private medical fees, insurance premiums, and medication have all increased. Those who rely on private clinics or hospitals now face higher out-of-pocket expenses, putting a greater financial strain on middle-class Singaporeans. Who is affected the most? Middle-class and lower-income families. For lower-income families, every extra dollar counts, and the GST hike disproportionately affects those who spend a larger share of their income on necessities. Even with government relief measures like GST vouchers and YouSave rebates, many Singaporeans feel that these are short-term fixes for an issue that affects their daily survival. The middle class, especially those who don't qualify for subsidies, feels the squeeze the most. Many are already paying high mortgages, education costs, and daily expenses. With inflation and GST increases combined, the middle-income group is stuck between rising costs and stagnant wages, making it harder to save or invest for the future. What about business owners and SMEs? Small and medium enterprises, SMEs, are struggling the most with the GST hike. These businesses, which form the backbone of Singapore's economy, now have to deal with higher operational costs from raw materials to utilities and wages. To stay profitable, many have no choice but to pass these costs on to consumers, resulting in even higher prices for goods and services. For businesses that cannot increase prices, the GST hike eats into their profits, making it harder to survive in an already competitive market. Many business owners worry that weaker consumer spending caused by the higher cost of living will lead to lower sales and potential closures in the long run. How does Singapore's GST compare to other countries? Despite the increase, Singapore's GST remains relatively low compared to many developed nations. Countries like Australia, 10%, Japan, 10%, and the UK, 20%, all have higher consumption tax rates. However, the key difference is that these countries also have higher wages, stronger social safety nets, and lower overall living costs in some areas. Singapore's lack of capital gains tax, estate tax, and lower income tax rates has historically balanced out its GST. But for ordinary Singaporeans who don't benefit from these tax incentives, the reality is that their day-to-day expenses have increased while their salaries have not kept up. As living costs continue to rise, many Singaporeans are asking, at what point does the financial burden become too much? In the wake of Singapore's recent goods and services tax, GST increase, public reaction has been notably mixed. Some citizens express concerns that the tax hike exacerbates the already high cost of living, while others acknowledge the government's rationale but question its timing. Economists have analyzed the potential effects of the GST increase on consumer spending and inflation. While some anticipated a dampening effect on spending, studies indicate that consumer behavior remained relatively stable post-hike. This resilience suggests that despite initial concerns, the GST increase did not significantly deter consumer spending. Turn Search 3. The GST hike's impact on inflation has been a focal point of debate. Opposition leaders argue that the tax increase has intensified inflationary pressures, making essential goods and services less affordable. In contrast, government officials contend that the GST hike's contribution to inflation is minimal and that other global factors play a more substantial role in driving up prices. Turn Search 0. Concerns have arisen regarding the potential for the GST increase to influence migration patterns, with some suggesting that higher living costs could prompt residents to consider relocating. However, current data does not indicate a significant uptick in immigration directly linked to the tax hike. Nonetheless, the increased cost of living may lead individuals and families to reassess their spending habits, potentially reducing discretionary expenditures to manage their budgets effectively. The question of whether wages will rise to offset the additional tax burden remains pertinent. While certain sectors may adjust salaries in response to inflation and cost of living increases, widespread wage hikes are not guaranteed. Consequently, without corresponding income adjustments, the GST hike could erode purchasing power, particularly among middle and lower income groups. This scenario underscores the importance of monitoring wage trends and implementing supportive measures to maintain the populace's standard of living. In summary, the GST increase has elicited a spectrum of reactions from the public and has potential implications for consumer behavior, inflation, migration, and wage dynamics. Ongoing assessment of these factors is crucial to understand the long-term effects of the tax hike on Singapore's economy and its residents' well-being. As we wrap up, the big question remains: will the PAP's decision to raise GST truly benefit Singapore in the long run, or is it just making life harder for ordinary citizens? While the government argues that these tax hikes are essential for sustaining public services and infrastructure, many Singaporeans are feeling the immediate strain on their wallets. What do you think? Was the GST hike necessary, or could the government have explored other solutions to generate revenue? Should Singapore focus more on alternative tax measures, corporate taxation, or other economic strategies instead? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into Singapore's economy, global trends, and financial insights. Thanks for